Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
It's me, Egbert, once again. I'm the new owner of this station. I went out and hired the best talk radio consultant, Jeff Allen from News Talk STL, and told him to hire the worst talent he could find. Jeff did exactly as I told him. Ladies and gentlemen, here are Brad and John.
And John is back in the John Cave, right?
I am. And thanks to everybody for sticking with us. This is in 5 months that we've been doing the show. We've been doing the show just over 5 months. And this is the first time I had done a call from the car. So we were working on a little bit of something. And you know what? It's a good reminder. It's kind of like in politics. We're all real people. We're not holograms. We're not AI. We're not robots. Sometimes we provide for our offspring, and we got to get them places, you know?
John was doing some parenting, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a guy who used to move my kids around on a very regular basis. Matter of fact, to the point where having 4 kids like I do and did back in the day, there were many, many, many times that I was driving this one here and this one there and picking up this one from this one and all sorts of stuff like that. Okay, anyway, the NPR thing, okay? The NPR people, first off, like, once again, how can the NPR, and I preface this by saying, once upon a time, my boss, E.A.W. Smith, Ted Smith, a World War II veteran for the English, who was a Royal Air Force fighter pilot, who I had at the time a due amount of respect for. As the years go past me, I look back and I think my time with him, I think to myself, wow, what an interesting guy. And there's so many things about him I'd appreciate. The one thing about it is, and this is sort of sad, I've never mentioned this before on the air, our relationship deteriorated. You know why it deteriorated?
I don't.
He took over the radio stations in Austin, Texas, KLBJ, AM and FM at the time, which were still owned by I think Linda Bain Johnson, who was Lady Bird, still owned by Lady Bird, okay? And he brought me in for a weekend, flew me down to give a seminar he actually trusted me to teach his staff some new technology they'd installed. And on the way to the airport, the guy who picked me up, their program director, I wish I could remember his name because he was a super nice guy, offered me a job. And I went like, what do you mean offer me a job? He says, well, to be honest with you, the reason that Ted brought you down here wasn't really for you. He says, we really wanted you to help our staff, but he wanted to see how you worked with our staff. And they offered me a quasi high-level position at the radio station, which I turned down. And Ted was not wild about that. Ted actually got mad at me about that because I turned down the job offer because, one of those things. Anyway, once upon a time, I was not happy with what was going down at the radio station. They were making some changes, and Ted called me into his office, and he looked over his little reader glasses he always wore, and he said, "Bloody Brad," because when you're in trouble, your name was always preceded by Bloody. "Bloody Brad, I don't know who discovered the ocean, but it wasn't the effing fish.
Yes.
Think about it." The idea being is that when you're swimming around and you're a fish, you don't know you're in the ocean, or you don't know what part of the ocean is, because that's where you are. You're just surrounded by your other fish in the school, and everything is copacetic because of the fact that that's how you are. So now one of the accusations that this Yuri Berliner made was that of the 87 editors, there was not one of them that was a registered Republican. They were
right.
all registered Democrats.
Or identified as a Republican.
Right. And I think it's Ayesha Roscoe, who is the new host on the weekends, because once again, I do listen. She said, well, what he didn't talk about was there are some registered independents.
Oh, well, that's practically a Republican, Brad.
Right. So I'm thinking to myself, she's not refuting what he's saying directly. She's essentially saying, well, there may not be any Republicans, but we've got 87 Democrats, and there's a handful of independents.
And for all we know, the independents identify, jokes aside, as Democratic Socialists. So just because they're independent doesn't mean that they would lean Republican. They could be Democratic Socialists. They could be straight-up Socialists.
See, the interesting thing about this is that this is me, okay? A true journalist would take the criticism and say, you know what? Let's take a look. Maybe you might be right. Maybe we might be a little bit biased. And there was also one of the reporters who pointed out the fact that Berliner had said that they had Adam Schiff on 25 times during the Russiagate and the impeachment of Donald Trump. They had him in 25 times, and it was interesting because I think I told you that Fox News did an investigative report on that, and they figured out it was 32 times that he'd underestimated.
Yeah, they understated it.
Yeah, they understated it, or Uri Berliner understated it. It was 25 times, 32 times. And they said, yes, and they came up with this number. They said, but if you take a look at the total number of guests we had on NPR during that period of time, it was like he was less than 1% of our guest total on the station. And I'm going like, yeah, but every time he was on there, he was beating the drum for Donald Trump's a terrible person and we need to throw him in jail. You know, I mean, that's the difference. You know, it would be like the Post-Dispatch saying, well, you know, every time we run a editorial that's for the Republicans, you know, we never hear any good things. Well, that's because you don't ever run any editorials for the Republicans.
And the other thing is, if Ayesha Roscoe, let's talk about her for a minute. If she was really concerned with diversity, Ayesha Roscoe would have Roscoe P. Coltrane come in and give an opinion.
Well, the whole thing is, and once again, if this is a private entity, like if this were, you know, the J3 crew, if this were, you know, Joe Rush and John and what was it, Jeff Allen, and they've got their own station and they're putting their own money into it and running it, you know, I don't care. Knock yourself out. Once again, same thing with Tracy. Rick and Tracy Ellis, they put their own money into the station. You know, they're doing what they think is right. You know, knock yourself out. But this is government money. I mean, this is you and me spending money on this crazy, weird stuff. And in the state of Missouri, like in most states where there's an NPR station, most of the NPR stations are affiliated with a university. And in this case... Speaking
of, have you followed any of Tim Eby's statements lately about immunity and St. Louis Public Radio? Have you followed any of this?
No, and Tim Eby is, see, now, in full disclosure, okay, I guess I can say I know Patty Wente. You know who Patty Wente was?
No, I don't.
Patty Wente, once again, one of my favorite people. Now, when I say this, people will go, if they know Patty, some people are going to go, now, you know, Brad's a jerk, I'm never going to listen to him again. Or some people are going to go like, wow, Brad has good taste, okay? Patty Wente was this incredibly interesting woman who essentially made the transition from NPR, or from classical music to NPR. They brought in Patty Wente back in the 80s. And at that point in time, KWMU was a classical music station. And there was a guy whose name... And he had a great name for being. He was the general manager, and his name was, and he ran the station as a classical music station. His name was Rainer Steinhoff. I'll never forget that. Do I remember all these crazy names or what? Rainer Steinhoff.
Yeah. That name just puts you right to sleep, though.
Well, it's you know, when you say that name, if you're drinking a cup of coffee, you have to put your little finger in the air. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
You have to say Rainer Steinhoff, you know, because that's just the way that is. Okay, so she came in, and she's like a bull in a china shop, and that's just Patty Wente. And matter of fact, when I met her for the first time, the reason I met her is because of the fact that she wanted to be on my traffic network at the time. And St. Louis Magazine had done what most people thought was a hit piece on her, because she had ruffled a lot of feathers and she fired a lot of people and she switched over to NPR and blah, 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 blah. And the cover story for that particular issue of St. Louis Magazine had a full-page picture, like a headshot of her on the front cover, and the big title was, "I'm a bewitch, okay, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that they had it in quotes. And in the article, she talked about that she was a bewitch. I think her quote was, "I'm a bewitch, but I'm a good bewitch." In other words, the idea being is that she admitted that she was sort of fit the mold of the bewitched name, but yet she wasn't afraid to crack some heads and break some china and stuff like that. And what she did was she turned, at the time, the station was losing money and, nobody was supporting it. And they were also competing with a commercial classical station, which was very, very, very well done, KFUO, which is now the God Squad station 99.1.
Yep.
Okay, so essentially, she was this incredibly flamboyant. I don't mean flamboyant in dress, but she just didn't have a filter, and whatever was on her mind came out her mouth, and that's
So what happened to her, Brad?
Well, she ran amok with the news department. The same thing that happened to Tim Eby. And one of the classic moments were, this is like me recounting my time of going back and forth with Patty Wente. The reason that I got to know Patty Wente fairly well is I worked with her with my traffic network, and then after I sold my traffic network, she was trying to improve the station, and she wasn't getting enough budget. So she was told by the university if she could sell some of the surplus equipment, that they would let her use that money for the radio station. So she sold me some equipment, and I bought a couple recorders and a board and actually a soundproof booth, which I still use today, a big monstrous thing that weighed literally about 6 tons, and I had it moved in the whole bit. So, and I paid her for that, went all through the university, there were sealed bids and the whole bit. I was the only bidder because nobody really else wanted the stuff. So her and I got to be friends, and to the point where then what happened was then she got the reporters who were trying to essentially blow her up. And my classic story was the Riverfront Times reporter was like literally following her around, sort of dogging her. And she was sort of not having a good time with this guy, and she decided she didn't want to talk to him anymore. So one day he shows up at the radio station, and he says, "Is Patty here?" And the lady says, "Yes, she's in her office." And he says, "I'm not leaving till I talk to Patty." So she calls me, and this is actually sort of funny. She calls me, and she goes, "Brad, what do I do?" And I said, "Patty, is there a back door to the radio station?" And she says, "Yeah." I go, "I'm going to tell you, and you're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you to do, but here's how you need to turn PR toward you. And this is the thing. John, as you a comms guy, I'm going to tell you this story. You've never heard this story from me before, and you're either going to say this is the stupidest thing you've ever heard or the smartest thing you've ever heard, okay?" I say, here's what you do. Duck out the back door. Can you get to your car without him seeing you? Oh, yeah, you had to understand, when they're in the basement of a building on UMSL campus. And she goes, "Oh, yeah, easily." And I said, "Get in your car, jump in your car, drive down to the Central West End where the Riverfront Times office is, walk into the office and say to the receptionist, 'Hi, I'm Patty Wente, and your reporter's been trying to talk to me, and you know what? I'm more than willing to talk to him. Here I am.
That's great.
Can you have him come up and talk to me?' And because, she would know exactly where he was because he was at her office.
Yes.
But yet.
And now, is this the pre-cell phone era?
Yeah, no. This is cell phone. Well,
modern day. Okay.
No. I'm trying to think. This would have been cell phone era, but it wouldn't have been portable cell phone. It would have been cell phone in your car kind of era.
Oh, well then, yeah. So then that way, that guy has no idea. Like the RFT office can't just text them and say, "Hey, get down here."
Right. Patty's here. Right. Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So in other words, he's sitting in her office. She's at his office, and then what she would do was she would come out and say, "You know what? This guy claims he never wants to talk. I never talked to him. The other day, matter of fact, on Thursday at 3:00, I was at
the office for an hour waiting for him. Right. He was nowhere to be found.
I went down to the Central, the Del Mar Loop, and I sat in the office of the Riverfront Times for an hour waiting for him to show up, and he never showed up. So don't tell me that I'm avoiding him because of the fact that I went to his office." Now, from that thing, I learned a very valuable lesson in my life. How do you diffuse situations where people coming after you? You show up in their office.
Yeah, and you've pulled that many times, Brad. Now, in 2024, most of the time, the office door is locked because nobody works in an office anymore.
But see,
Brad.
once again, the crazy thing on that is to the point you're exactly right. Because, and still, did I tell you the SaintLouis story?
No, you haven't.
Okay. There's a, let me just put it to a crazy thing. There is at the St. Louis University Law School, which is down on Tucker. They have a whole office building that was donated to them. There is a national legal document repository. I don't know if you know this or not. And you can go into that office in that library. Anybody can go in because it is designated a national repository for federal government things. And I don't understand the whole thing, but there's something with the federal government. The federal government has certain law libraries it uses around the country that you can essentially, that they put documents into, and it's public access. The only problem with that is if you tried it today and try to get into the SLU Law Library, but you would be told they're no longer allowing the public in because they're still on COVID lockdown. You can't get into the public.
Oh, get out of here. Are you serious?
True story. You can't get into the public library at SLU, the public law library, because they're on COVID lockdown to this day. And how do I know? I tried it about 3 weeks ago. And at the request of an attorney who is a friend of mine, who I was trying to get something for her, and she said, well, just go down to the SLU library and they'll give it to you. And so I called her, and she's a alumni of SLU. I called her back from the lobby saying, guess what? I can't get in. And she goes, it's public library, public law library. I go, guess what? They can't get in because it's on lockdown from COVID. And she's going, get out. And I go, you want to talk to the guard at the front desk? I'll hand him the phone and he can tell you. So once again, you're exactly right. People hide behind, we're still on COVID lockdown.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Now, you said that's on Tucker, right?
Yeah. Well,
because if you go a little bit, you said that's where the repository is. If you go a little bit further down Tucker and Market at City Hall, there's a whole lot of human suppositories there, Brad.
I knew there was coming. How did I know that? I put the ball on the tee, and I was just wondering if John would come on and swing his club at it. Okay.
When there's no offspring nearby, I'm free to make hemorrhoid jokes, Brad.
So, there you go. So my advice to Patty Wente, what do you think? Was that good advice about showing up?
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah. Now, in this day and age, it wouldn't cut it. Here's why it wouldn't happen, though, Brad, because reporters in 2024 would lack the courage to have a face-to-face conversation. Many of them would lack the courage to have a face-to-face conversation with somebody they were hounding. They'd rather send emails. Let's go back to Jay Ashcroft and Denny Hoskins. What I like about the conversation, Brad, is that it is two grown men having a face-to-face conversation. Denny Hoskins didn't leave there and create anonymous troll Twitter accounts and say, ooh, I'm going to get back at my opponents and I'm going to create these pseudonym troll accounts and I'm going to get them. Denny went up to Jay and told him what he had on his mind. It was two men having a conversation, Brad. Like, why don't we have more of that?
John, I couldn't agree with you more. I have a situation, matter of fact, I don't have one, I have two, I have three situations right now where I have people who are doing exactly what you just described to me, and not the face-to-face, the exact opposite, where they are sending anonymous letters to some of our clients. And this happened to me with Brian Nieves, believe it or not, where this guy sent letters to various people, essentially trying to get me to dump Brian Nieves. And the crazy part of it is I kept saying to this person, hey, instead of doing all this backhanded stuff, why don't you just come on the air with Brian?
Yes.
Just sit across the table from him.
They're terrified of that, Brad. They cannot do that. And let's be self-promotional here. I talk about this in my book, which folks can buy on Amazon. These sort of cowards, Brad. You have men. So Denny's in his 50s. You have men that are Denny's age and older that would sit around and would rather send anonymous letters or create anonymous Twitter accounts that can't have a conversation face-to-face with another man. And in your experience, Brad, can you imagine if whoever was sending anonymous letters or, letters complaining about Brian Nieves, you know why, Brad? They can't stand face-to-face with Brian Nieves and have a conversation with them as a man.
Well,
again, go back to Jay and Denny. Jay stood there and Jay listened and Denny spoke his piece. Those are two men in 2024 having a conversation.
But now this is going to be really old school, okay? More importantly, and I don't know Denny, I don't know Jay. I know you've had dealings with Jay before. You know Jay, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I wouldn't say I know him well. No, not at all.
But
I can't claim filial loyalty there, Brad.
But you've met with him at times, correct?
I've talked to him, yeah.
Right, okay. I've never met either of the two, okay? But in 2024, I will give Denny his props by saying he defended his wife. And
yes.
I still think today, and you get in trouble for this nowadays because the feminists will say, well, the women are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves. And quite honestly, they may be, but to me, the dude is still protecting his wife. And I still say to this day, any guy who stands up for his wife, for his girlfriend, for his daughter, for his sister, any guy who stands up for a female is okay in my book. And
absolutely. Agree 100%, Brad.
And I just don't get the whole crazy weird thing. I mean, I know women, are as capable, and I talk about this all the time. I have a saying which I say all the time, which people think I'm being facetious when I say whatever a man can do, a woman can do better. I really believe that in so many different aspects. Obviously, in some of them, not so much, but for the most part, I think women make better business people. I mean, in the sales force, in sales, women just are incredible good salespeople.
Yeah, there's a few other elements going on of why women can sell things and why they can raise money. There's a few other attributes they have. But other than that, Brad, agree completely about the idea of chivalry and about the idea of men standing up. We're in a society where men abandon their daughters, where men don't stand up for women, where men have no chivalry, where men create anonymous X accounts over the age of 18 years old to attack other people. But then, again, you have a man having a conversation with another man, Brad. It's refreshing.
It is, and although I don't agree with the dress code, but
I got you, Brad. Hey, it's Cardinals color, and we all know that these days you have an anti-Cardinals bias, though, Brad.
Well, hold it now. I what now again?
Ancient Chinese secret.
Oh, ancient Chinese secret. Do not sell land to China.
We are National Public Radio, NPR, where the news is what we say it is.
Hey, thanks to everybody for sticking through with me today when I was in the car. And my audio is going to be much better. This was a rough draft today. We're going to do it really well the second time.
Okay, so is it the same tomorrow?
Yeah, it's the same tomorrow, Brad.
Okay, we're going to get out here.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?